Dear ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to speak at this August gathering. I would highlight the so-called Narco-Jihad phenomenon and try to contribute with an alternative solution to the issue. The nexus between narcotics and terrorism is inherently controversial and a deeply politicized concept. The poppy plant cultivation currently flourishes in the Golden Crescent, which is Asia's principal area of illicit opium production that overlaps three nations, namely Afghanistan, Iran, and Pakistan, whose mountainous peripheries define the crescent. The dimensions of Afghanistan's opium production has reached unparalleled degrees of significance considering the impact it has on the global economy. The relationship between Afghanistan and the poppy seed has existed for thousands of years. However, it is only in the last 30 years that the country has become responsible for cultivating an astonishing amount of opium. Warlords, insurgents, drug traffickers, and corrupt officials saw an opportunity of abusing the vulnerability of the state, which resulted from the ongoing violent conflicts and extreme autocracy, and were capable of establishing dominion and monopoly over key territories inland and particularly at its peripheries. As a consequence, Afghanistan provided the ideal milieu for the establishment and maintenance of a strong and enduring illicit economy based on the cultivation of opium. Currently, Afghanistan is at the epicenter of worldwide drug trafficking, with more than 90% of the world's supply of opium and heroin originating from the country. The triggers behind this hegemony of Afghanistan's opium production at the global market are several. Years of ceaseless warfare and civil insurgency, the historical absence of a legitimate centralized government, the effective control and ruling imposed by religious extremist groups, lack of legitimate opportunities for development outside the opium trade, and the failure of the international community of imposing successful interdiction programs. The drug industry additionally fuels corruption, which erodes the legitimacy of government institutions, particularly those responsible for security, defense, and justice. The opium economy has made its way through the highest echelons of policy and decision-making bodies, posing an imminent threat to the positive growth and constructive state building of Afghanistan. With the fall of the Soviet Union, internal conflicts between the various Mujahideen groups erupted, leading to a widespread destabilization. And in 1998, the hardline Pakistani-sponsored Taliban gained control over the country and consolidated their power by using the opium trade as a tool towards achieving political and economic ends. War turned out to be good for business. Yet, the Taliban had to justify the production of opium, which is forbidden by the Quran, in order to secure their own victory. Despite the fact that the Taliban acknowledged the evil nature of drugs, they emphasized the evil nature of the West and Western Kafirs, whose eradication was worth more. Many Afghan farmers, despite being ideologically abhorrent to the concept of cultivating drugs and desiring to abstain from it, were coerced, either through exploitative sharecropping agreements or under the threat of violence. Yet, many more actors than simply the Taliban participate in the opium economy, and they exist throughout all levels of the social strata. Therefore, what one could observe is the hypocritical, ongoing narrative of those various terrorist organizations which use the intrinsically un-Islamic mass production and distribution of drugs as a pretext for advancing their religious and ideological goals, where the evidence for pure economic gains is in abundance. Another argument that exposes the false religious virtues, which the Taliban, alongside their major supporters, abide to, is the fact that the drugs economy promulgated by them does not only spoil the Western world, but the fellow Islamic one as well. The Afghanistan National Drug Use Survey from 2015 found that up to 2.9 million Afghans use drugs, which accounts for 11% of the population. And up to 2.3 million use opiates, about 7% of the population. Nationally, 9% of Afghan children under the age of 14 tested positive for drugs, overwhelmingly opiates. The data indicates that between 1 and 1.2 million children would test positive for one or more drugs. In Iran, the number of people suffering from drug addiction has more than doubled in the last 6 years. A survey carried out by a drug control group has found that about 2.8 million people are regularly consuming drugs in the country. The UN stated that Iran has one of the worst addiction crises in the world, affecting people from all walks of society. Factors such as political instability, economic stagnation, high unemployment, lack of opportunities for development, and poverty, the lingering results of years of US sanctions, induce feelings of hopelessness and anguish, and that sense of desperation could drive people towards drug abuse. Pakistan's drug addiction, which kills 700 people daily, also bankrolls terrorists. According to the Drug Use in Pakistan 2013 survey report, there are 7.6 million drug addicts in Pakistan. These addicts increase at a rate of 40,000 per year, putting Pakistan amongst the top drug-abusing countries in the world. As Antonio Maria Costa, the executive director of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, stated in 2007, drug traffickers have a symbiotic relationship with insurgents and terrorist groups such as the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Instability makes opium cultivation possible. Opium buys protection and pays for weapons and food soldiers. And these in turn create an environment in which drug lords, insurgents, and terrorists can operate with impunity. Opium is the glue that holds this murky relationship together. If profits fall, these sinister forces have the most to lose. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime further maintains that the drugs trade has become a major source for financing suicide bombers due to their so-called marriage of convenience, which further alludes to the instrumental usage of suicide attacks by terrorist organizations. Alike, resorting to the cultivation of opium and trafficking of drugs, the intentional act of ending one's life, which additionally endangers the lives of innocent people and children, is condemned by Islam. Jihadists justify suicide bombing by arguing that the killing of infidels allows having recourse to extreme means and war tactics, and in return, they will be granted martyrdom. Yet, the Quran asserts that only the Almighty grants martyrdom, and no one is allowed to claim martyrdom by force. The example of suicide bombers further illustrates the continuous and unceasing hypocrisy of extremist groups which are willing to blasphemously abuse the Islamic doctrine in order to meet their immoral ends. According to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime's World Drug Report of 2007, the total potential value of Afghanistan's 2006 opium harvest, accruing to farmers, laboratory owners, and Afghan traffickers, reached about $3.1 billion. So the question is, what proportion of that money is used for perpetrating acts of terrorism? Estimating the size of illicit economies and their profit levels has proven to be notoriously difficult. Yet, it is evaluated that somewhere between 30 and 40% of the Taliban's income comes from drugs, with the lion's share coming from fundraising in the Gulf and Pakistan. To raise money, the Taliban run a sophisticated protection racket from poppy farmers and drug traffickers, collecting taxes from the farmers and payoffs from the traffickers for transporting the drugs through insurgent-controlled areas. However, it is crucial to mention that terrorists are far from being the only fish in the drug trafficking pot. As previously stated, various criminal gangs, often connected to the government, the Afghan security forces, tribal elites, many ex-warlords, and government officials are also active players. The Taliban are involved in some opium smuggling to Pakistan. However, this business is dominated by affiliates of the main Pakistani political parties and figures in the Pakistani army and intelligence services. And like the Afghan politicians, who also profit from the poppy trade, they launder the proceeds in Dubai and the United Arab Emirates. This illuminates the wide spectrum of international agents involved, which infers the possibility of expansion of the opium cultivation to Afghanistan's neighboring countries. By far, the worst scenario from a global security perspective would be the shift of drug production to the federally administered tribal areas, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, or even Punjab in Pakistan. For over 20 years, Pakistan has been a major heroin refining and smuggling hub in the region, with the large-scale Hawala system facilitating the transfer of drug profits. Today, these territories also have extensive and well-organized Salafi insurgency and terrorist groups that aim to overturn the Pakistani government. Therefore, counter-narcotic and counter-terrorist strategies must go hand in hand in order to even begin to turn the current against this powerful and well-established industry. The concept of Narco-Jihad, the contradictory and absurd justification of acts of violence in the name of religion, which is nourished by the revenues of the illegal trade of drugs, needs to be fully recognized and condemned by all parties involved, including the common people, opium cultivators, insurgents, government officials, and policymakers. If the Taliban and the drug lords use the Islamic rhetoric to give righteous grounds for their actions, then this very same rhetoric must be used and backlashed against them in order to unveil their hypocritical and counterintuitive stance. This could be achieved through nationwide public campaigns, which involve all sectors of society, religious, educational, and governmental. For every leaflet and exhortation from the insurgents justifying opium, the Afghan government should be there to highlight the Taliban's hypocrisy and advertise the damage done to other Muslims. The starving farmer who grows poppy has been a convenient scapegoat for long enough and must be finally acknowledged that drug kingpins, terrorist commanders, and corrupt government officials bear the responsibility for this worldwide drug crisis. Disrupting the drug trade should take place through integrating and strengthening legal rural livelihoods, providing treatment to drug addicts, raising awareness and providing public education about the evils of heroin abuse, and developing state institutions to combat drug trafficking. Counter-narcotic and counter-terrorism forces should start pinpointing the Taliban's treacherous line of reasoning by highlighting how Afghanistan's opium has started plaguing the Muslim world, with the fellow Islamic countries of Iran and Pakistan as examples. The drug trade in Afghanistan has evident repercussions and destabilizing effects on regional and global security levels. The increasing drug addiction among the citizens of the neighboring countries portrays how the narco-trafficking industry does not simply deteriorate the economic stability and political situation in the region, which is already tormented by wars, terrorism, and insurgencies, but further creates acute social issues. The booming drug economy, which goes hand in hand with the operations of Islamist terrorist groups, has turned the subcontinent in a violence-ridden wasteland. Any policies emphasizing the stabilization of Afghanistan through the elimination of violent extremist outfits without effectively addressing the narco trade will be unsound and unsustainable, since the drug economy remains one of the main sources of funding for terrorism in the region. Counter-terrorism and counter-narcotic strategies must go alongside, since the causes and dynamics of drug trafficking and terrorism are intrinsically linked. The hypocritical reasoning of terrorist organizations, which abuse the religiosity of the local population in order to fight their alleged holy cause through ultimately unholy means, urgently requires to be exposed. If one replaces ideology with hard cash, religious devotion with vicious perversion of virtuousness, and the jihadists' claimed Islamic Caliphate territory with a drugs-fueled gangland, the image of a terrorist's actual Islamism becomes clearer. Haram money for a so-called and advertised halal cause should compel the local population to question the means and objectives of those who wish to impose their wicked interpretation of religion. Thank you.
Thank you.